Hi, my name is Brian Lieb. I'm the Plain Language Coordinator for Hennepin County and a writing instructor, and I'm here to talk about how using plain language can help you connect with your readers. Last year, my wife got a new job. We'd had our health insurance through her old employer, so we needed to sign up for new coverage. We completed and submitted the forms and then moved on with our lives. Then, about a month later, I received an 8-page letter in the mail about my insurance. This was the first paragraph. Now, my wife and I are both organized and we're good at getting things done, so I was fairly confident we still had insurance. Still, this letter was troubling. The confusing legal language, the ominous tone, the sheer length of it. I wasn't even sure I understood the first paragraph. You experienced an event of A/and termination, which constitutes a qualifying event under the Hennepin County Group Health Plan. Suddenly, I wasn't as confident. Did I forget to submit a form? Did I submit it but it wasn't processed? Did my kids still have insurance? So I found a phone number in the letter and I called, and it turned out there wasn't a problem. It was simply a form letter mailed out anytime someone dropped coverage, regardless of whether or not they signed up for new coverage. But I also found out I wasn't the only person to call. The problem was that the letter focused on processes instead of the needs of the recipients of the letter. And that's a great place to start a conversation about plain language. With plain language, you focus your writing on the needs of your readers, your audience. There have been many definitions over the years of plain language, including one that accompanied passage of the Plain Writing Act of 2010. But this is the most common definition. With everything you publish, your audience should be able to find what they need, so it's not buried in paragraphs of text. Understand what they find, so your writing isn't filled with government jargon, acronyms, or passive sentence construction. And finally, they need to be able to use that information to meet their needs. So if you have a website with a form on it and your audience can find it, they can understand it, but the online submission doesn't work, you've still failed them. Find, understand, and use. That's it. Pretty simple. But does it work? Yes. Results include increased audience satisfaction and understanding. In Hennepin County, we test before and after versions of documents, and we have found that people can more easily understand and retain the information from the plain language documents, and they have a more positive opinion of the organization. They like us better. You also find increased access to services and benefits and increased compliance with regulations. Washington State rewrote instructions for business tax forms and tripled their compliance rate. Finally, you also see decreased costs, often through reduced phone calls, but sometimes through more efficient processes. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs rewrote a letter asking for up-to-date beneficiary information. When a veteran dies, if they don't have that information, they have to manually track it down. After rewriting the letter, they saw a 50% increase in responses, and they estimate they save about $5 million a year in staff time. So let's see what plain language looks like. This is basically what most modern drug labels look like. They're busy, they have small font, but they're basically readable. There are thick horizontal lines and bold headings to help readers scan to the information they need. The directions are in a table format, which we know even elementary school students learn how to read and can handle pretty easily. This is what they looked like before. There's lots of jargon in here, and the instructions are in paragraph format, so there's a much greater chance that someone could misread the instructions. Nutrition labels have quite a bit less information than drug labels, but they have a similar layout. Thick horizontal lines to divide the sections, bold font for the headings and the key information, and the numbers. Calories and grams are right next to the text, making it easy to see what you need to know. And there are thin horizontal lines to make it easier to read. But the old nutrition labels were simply harder to read. No headings are bold at all. Everything was given the same treatment. The centered text at the top and the middle is hard to read, and the pink font certainly doesn't help. The next example comes from the courts. Studies by the American Bar Association and from law journals show that most people struggle with legal instructions. So California rewrote their jury instructions. They'd had a phrase that said a preponderance of evidence, and they rewrote that to say more likely than not. They also had a phrase that said failure of recollection is common, innocent misrecollection is not uncommon. Now go determine someone's fate. Failure of recollection is common, innocent misrecollection is not uncommon. They rewrote that to say people often forget things or make mistakes in what they remember. That's a great improvement. Let's look at another legal example because people in government often think they are required to use the statutory language. But usually your website, your handout, and your brochure are not your legal document, so you can and should use plain language in those. In this case, someone found an interesting and entertaining way to communicate legal information. 500px is a photo sharing website like Flickr and Instagram. And they have their legal information on their site, and right next to it, a plain language explanation of what that means. For user conduct, the legal version was 571 words. For the plain language version, right next to it, they say, basically, you cannot use our site to post pornographic material, harass people, send spam, negatively vote on all photos, and do other crazy stuff. Be reasonable and responsible, don't do anything stupid, and you'll be fine. No one could say they don't understand those instructions. This next example is from Hennepin County. The Hennepin County Home School is a state-licensed residential treatment center for youth who have been referred by the courts. When children are admitted there, their families received a letter that explained the processes for what will happen and when they can visit. Unfortunately, the letter focused on the processes instead of the families. The first sentence of the letter read, "Custodial adults and other approved visitors shall be allowed to visit residents in designated and supervised areas that allow for appropriate physical contact and informal communication." Now, if I'm the parent, is that me? Am I the custodial adult? Do I feel comforted that my child has been admitted here? So we helped them focus on a rewrite that worked better for families. This is the online version. First, you'll notice it's much shorter, about 50% of the previous word count. It's easily scannable with headers, so readers can jump to the information they need. Under Who Can Visit, it starts with parents, step-parents, and legal guardians before it gets to custodial adults. It's easy to read. There's an easy-to-read table further down showing when people can visit. So people showed up on days they can visit and brought items that they're allowed to bring. This helped not only families and youth, but it made the jobs of staff much easier. This next example is from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. They produce a daily air quality index. One morning I had a headache, and on the drive into downtown Minneapolis, I noticed a thick haze over the skyline that matched the haze in my head. I went online to see if the air would clear over the next several days, and the forecast I got was roughly 100 words filled with jargon. I checked in with them and was told that they knew that most people struggled with those descriptions, but the scientists felt they needed to use that language to be accurate. So they worked and came up with a solution that removed the jargon completely. The new version uses color-coded graphics and simple terms like good and unhealthy, so anyone going to the index can understand. This is where I ask everyone to take a deep breath. The next time you're stuck in a meeting negotiating over individual words, remember, the IRS got it done. The IRS used to send out a 5-page account notice for people who owed back money. Not surprisingly, they had a low response rate. People probably put that letter in the same pile that they put the 8-page health insurance letter. So they rewrote that, and the new version is concise and scannable with clear headers like what you need to do immediately and if we don't hear from you. You can find what you need, you can understand the letter, and you can use it to meet your needs. You can tear it off at the perforation and mail it back in. So the IRS got it done. We've seen examples of plain language, and it clearly works. But why? Why does plain language work? There are 2 reasons. The first is that we're busy. The average office worker in the United States sends and receives roughly 120 emails per day. There are 3 million Facebook likes per minute in the world. When you ask people how often they check their smartphones, they say about 45 times a day. But when cell phone companies track logins, we average 85 logins per day. 2/3 of Americans are checking their phones from bed. So obviously, we're busy. The fact that we don't have as much time as we used to is even affecting our literature. In the early 20th century, popular novels averaged roughly 30 words per sentence. That's a long sentence. By the 1960s, after the advent of television and movies, that number dropped to a little more than 20 words per sentence. Today, if you read popular novels, many of them are closer to 10 words per sentence. So what happened? Use of the internet in the United States spiked around the year 2000, and between 2004 and 2007, Facebook, Twitter, and the iPhone were launched. We're busier and more distracted than we've ever been, and we simply don't have time to search for information. The second reason plain language works is that it turns out our brains are hardwired to respond to it. We don't read letter by letter, word by word, like we think we do. We scan for information. Here's an example. If you're having trouble reading this, try going faster. The faster you go, the easier it is for your brain to find the patterns and plug in the information. So let's see how your writing can take advantage of this. You need to create documents that are clear, concise, and scannable so that your readers can quickly and efficiently find the information they need. First, only include the most important information that most people need. All of us have received emails that are 5, 6, 7 paragraphs long. And after about the third or fourth paragraph, we usually pick up the phone and call and ask, "What do you need from me?" because they've buried the information. If they only included the key information that you needed, you could find it right away. Next, organize that information so it's in the most intuitive location. That's usually at the top of the page. Help your readers scan to find the information by using headers and white space so they can bounce around to what they need. Next, unless you're writing for experts, try to avoid acronyms and jargon. People won't understand it. Finally, use personal pronouns, like the IRS did. What happens if we don't hear from you? What you need to do immediately. Studies of readers show a clear preference for that type of language over things like processes or how to apply. So let's take another look at some good examples of plain language that are clear, concise, and scannable. This next example comes from Hennepin County, and it's also a National Plain Language Award winner. The old absentee voting webpage had nearly 800 words of text. It was fairly well written, but people simply couldn't find what they needed. Every day, people called the office and said, "I'm looking for this information." And the office would say, "Go to our website." "Well, I'm on your website." "Well, go to this page." "I'm on that page." They simply couldn't find it. So we worked with frontline staff to figure out what most people need most of the time, and that's all we included. We got rid of everything else. They were concerned that might lead to more phone calls from people who couldn't find what they wanted, and those people certainly did need to call, but we removed all of the other phone calls from everybody else. The result is clear, concise, and scannable. Let's look at one more National Award winner. Suburban Hospital at Johns Hopkins University publishes a handbook for patients that walks them through the process and helps them plan their own treatment. It uses clear language with pronouns like when you are in the hospital and when you go home. It's concise and only includes what patients need, and it's easily scannable with white space and headings. Now let's look back again at the insurance letter. It's even worse now. Studies of how readers respond to information show that people struggle with blocks of text. They can't find things, and they can't retain the information. But if you're clear, concise, and scannable, your audience can easily find what they need. They can understand the information. They tend to remember the basic details of what they've read, and they have a more positive view of your organization. If you want to learn more about plain language, here are a few resources. Plainlanguage.gov is the federal website, and it has tons of information, so give yourself a good half hour to wander around. The Center for Plain Language has a plain language blog and hosts the annual plain language competition, and the Hennepin County Writing Guide has a good summary of plain language and a style guide where you can look up common grammar and language questions. Thank you for watching. Remember, by using plain language, you will connect with your readers so they can easily find and understand the information they need, and it makes your job easier.